the meeting, correct? I believe you spoke with him, and also I
know I did. So it's a matter of whether or not he's having technology issues, or he never said he wasn't available. So I'm surprised he's not here.
Me too.
Okay,
Okay.
you're live, Chair.
Okay. Call the meeting to order. Are there any declarations of interest?
No.
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 Okay. Thank you. Do we have minutes from our last meeting?
We sure do.
Okay, we'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the last meeting.
I so move, Mr. Chair.
I have a
I would
second for
second.
that. Alan? Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's carried. Okay, we have the one item on the agenda today, and I'll pass it over to Rob to look at or to explain the application to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just kind of switching screens here on the small laptop. So it's an application for consent for 25 James Street East and 321 John Street in Coburg for Trinity Housing of Cobourg Corporation. This project went through a significant rezoning and official plan amendment in 2019, looking at an increase in density and building structure forms for a affordable housing or a joint affordable housing project, and has now run into a stumbling block with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation from a funding perspective that CMHC will only fund the portion of the property that's the new project. They don't want to have anything to do with the existing affordable housing project that's at 25 James Street. So the Housing Corporation has come to Town of Coburg Community Adjustment looking for basically it's a severance in principle, if you will, Chair, in terms of separating this property, but having a cross easement specifically for parking, pedestrian access, servicing, garbage, all of those kinds of things. So it will be an easement in gross over the whole property. It would still run and operate as one entity with the existing building that's on James Street at the corner, and then the new building basically going where the small house on John Street was that had been 321 John, and a small portion of the parking lot, an expansion to that parking area, which will then all trigger also site plan review, which they had been going through with development review team, but ran into this funding issue that they're trying to solve right now. The property is obviously zoned and designated correctly now, given the amendments that it went through in 2019 to look at the building form, setbacks, density, those kinds of things. Now it's just introducing this separation of basically the north third and the south 2/3. Again, more specifically funding for a funding process. It's a little different than what we ran into on Monroe Street just last year for that CMHC funding application where they separated those two buildings. Sorry, I still talk with my hands. I apologize. It's much harder to do with the camera for a Zoom meeting. In this case, it's a little bit more of a separation, but it was a similar kind of interest and rationale, unfortunately, with CMHC that has triggered this application. I'm just trying to see if there's any specific policies I want to try to raise to the committee's attention. From a zoning perspective, and I don't think Director McLaughlin nor myself specifically thought this was potential at the time, but how we worded the language for the specific zoning for the entire property of 25 John and 25 James East and 321 John as one whole entity when we originally rezoned it, looking at this, because there was some question whether or not the property 321 John was going to merge in title where the little house had been that's been subsequently demolished on John Street, into the overall Trinity parcel. We had worded it that way to make sure that that process was covered. Turns out now we're quite glad that we use that same language, because now with the potential to separate it into these two portions, even though it will still operate as one entity, really helps them, because now we're not looking at setbacks and coverage and such for individual parcels, but again for the whole conglomerate, if you will, for that project. There's no specific issues in terms of looking at county official plan, places to grow, growth plan that would look at a severance negatively in this instance. It's more from a land titling perspective. The official plan that was done for the for this site, again, it was a site-specific official plan amendment, site-specific rezoning amendment to permit the kind of building structure and form of development that is being proposed. There's basically a concept in it in what would be page 17 of 33 of the overall agenda, which is Schedule B. If you printed out a hard copy of my report, which shows the red box around the property at 25, and then 321 would be the new building and the parking lot and some auxiliary structures associated with that. So the easement would be on 25 James. The severed parcel would be the new parcel at 321 John. There's also a subsequent planning justification report from Bob Clark, who happens in this instance to also be a director of Trinity Housing, in support, looking from a planning policy perspective, describing some of the issues around the overall project, has a bit of a table with the number of units. Obviously, anything that can be done to help support affordable housing from a zoning site plan staffing issue, we're trying to strongly support. Again, in this instance, we've run into some CMHC funding issues that they only want to provide funding through their mortgage on a certain portion of this overall parcel. With that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any of the committee members' questions that they might have.
Are there any questions from the members?
I have a question, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Okay, certainly.
It's to Rob. Rob, you talked about the easement for over. The easement is going to be just over the James Street property, is it? It's not going to be on the John Street? Or will it be on both?
Oh, I'm sorry, I described that incorrectly. So they're severing off the 321 John Street, that south half, and it would then have an easement in favor of 25 James Street, the existing structure. So that way that the folks could walk, park, any piping that may be underground to service the structures are all incorporated with that. They're looking at having some bike storage on that as part of the environmental sustainability concepts for this new structure on that south 2/3, whereas the waste garbage recycling station is on the north property on 25 with a service driveway out to James Street, where they would have a contractor come in and collect those larger plastic bins or a small dumpster from that facility, so that way garbage management is taken care of.
The reason I was asking was when you originally started your presentation, you talked about CMHC's funding, and they didn't want to have funding for the James Street location. They were not interested in doing that. So if the easement, this I'm sure is all going to be sorted out with the lawyers, but if the easement is on both properties, then the easement on James Street has to be excluded from the funding, or vice versa, whatever. I was just, that was the only concern that I had, and it's not really a concern because I guess the lawyers will sort that out before anything gets registered. So
Peter,
anyway, I just wasn't sure where the easement was because I didn't recall seeing it in the materials that were originally provided. Although it might have been there, I just don't remember. So anyway, I'm good with it.
In this case, Mr. Chair, instead of a specific easement like we would normally see for a driveway or a pipe or a gas line, in this case, it's an easement in gross over the whole parcel, which again allows that back and forth movement of pedestrians, those kinds of things. If there are piping, and in particular, the one thing obviously from a planning perspective we were concerned with is all of the parking is in that south property. And so residents, visitors to the parcel would need to be able to get back and forth to both structures. So rather than a specific small easement, with it being an easement in gross, it covers the whole thing.
Peter, you had a question? You need to turn on your mic.
Oh, well, I've got one too.
Well, you go ahead while Peter figures out his microphone there.
My question is about the parking. Like, there's a parking lot there now for the one building, and the second building's going up. So how does that change, or what happens with parking?
Sure, Mr. Chair. In this instance,
may I just throw in mine after Adrian, because it really ties into it, is on the theme I think Adrian's after. The parking that you're going to be allowing certainly isn't the usual for apartments where they have to have parking for everyone plus visitor parking. That seems to be not part of this equation. Can you explain that? And that's, I think, part of Adrian's question also.
yeah, back to Astrid's question along with Peter's, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Astrid.
In this case, through the rezoning process, a very detailed review of the parking for both buildings was done and how that may or may not fit into the smaller space once the old tennis court on that south side between the existing parking lot and towards where Eagle.ca on Chapel Street is, when that area is redone in terms of a parking lot, the overall number of parking spaces was looked at a number of times, and a combined parking ratio was then applied to both buildings, both for affordable and market rate spaces, and a combined total was done as part of the zoning. That is what's being shown here in this concept site plan as part of the application back to the members. In many cases, affordable housing units, the folks just don't own a car. They don't have the ability to do that. And with other projects that were looked at in town, the number of parking spaces was reduced. So compared to a market rate regular apartment building at that 1.25 or 1.5, depending where in town it is, in this case, that number of parking spaces was reduced, and that is through zoning. And that detailed review, including actually, I believe 2 or 3 late night visits by Planner Franklin around midnight to just see what the parking usage was in that parking lot. You can't argue at 12 o'clock at night the folks that are living there on a Saturday night would be parked there. So it's a very low number for this overall parcel.
There's more than ample parking in that lot now. So, Peter?
And that was exactly it, Mr. Chair.
Peter?
The follow-up then, in the new apartment complex that they're putting up, there are 14 units that'll be for market value rent. I would assume, I don't know whether you're making the same assumption that those people who are paying market rent wouldn't have a car either. How many parking spots are there, Mr. Franklin?
I'm just seeing, because I know that was a specific clause within the rezoning, which of course I don't have here in front of me.
I couldn't see it on the scheme.
Yeah, I do know that overall look was done in the R514. One of the specific clauses was around the parking component. That was obviously a significant question of the Planning and Development Advisory Committee at the time last year, when the official plan and zoning bylaw were going through, and that was looked at. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the actual exception bylaw here in front of me, and I don't see that Mr. Clerk, in his review of the zoning, is just talking about setbacks, frontage, and density. Didn't get it. Oh, here we go. And I just don't have that number off the top of my head, but I know that was looked at. It was a combined rate for market at the 1.25, and then a reduced rate, I believe it was 0.6 for the affordable housing units. When that was combined and totaled for the overall number of units being proposed for both buildings, this parking lot did fit. So there was no request for variance from that in that instance, Mr. Chair.
From that zoning requirement.
That's correct.
Okay, well, I would, if I could have seen exactly how many spots were there, because I can understand you're saying those that were in for residency were geared to income, well, they may not, probably wouldn't have a car, but the 14 that are being rented out at market value, I don't think we can assume all of them won't have a car. I would assume most of them will. And the last thing we want is those people having to park out on the street, on John Street. It's a narrow street. But I couldn't find that figure either, Mr. Franklin.
I
That's why I'm
thought
asking.
in the report, the site plan showed the parking lot on it. I thought it was something like 30 or 31 spots, 32 spots.
I didn't see that, but maybe it's there.
But if that's the case, that's shared by both buildings. So the existing building, how many people in that building currently have a car and need a spot? Is that a market rate building, or is it a mixed usage situation as well?
That's geared to income building, total.
It's a which?
It's a geared to income building totally.
Okay.
The first building.
So
And I can tell you that I live around the corner and I go past that parking lot all the time, and it is a very empty parking lot. I can tell you that.
Okay, I don't want to prolong the debate on it, but I'm just saying, I think Astrid also is bringing it up, that there doesn't seem to be, although Alan said that somewhere it says 30 or 31. If it's 30 or 31, I'm quite satisfied with that. But I just couldn't find that number. And of the 14 units that are going to be at market rate, those people probably will have a car. And there should be, is a room for visitor parking included in that mass.
I would suggest to you that there's probably 30 parking spots there as it sits right now.
does anybody have?
Suggesting that, or you know that? Okay.
Rob, do you have handy the Schedule C, the report from Bob Clark?
I do. That's in my hand here, and he didn't get into a lot of detail on parking.
That's where my recollection comes from. If you have it, unfortunately I don't.
Yeah, there's 33 on site for members' knowledge in terms of the number of parking spaces that are shown, plus the loading spot. Of those 33, 2 are barrier free. There's also the loading spot off to John Street.
Okay.
And I believe the 1.25 times 14 and 33 times 0.6 ends up with 33 units, if I'm doing my math correctly here, very quickly in my head, to try to look at that 30s. Overall number.
It's low 30s is what we're talking about in total. So
that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was seen satisfactory for the number of parking spaces for this by council at the time.
Okay.
Astrid, did we ever deal with your question?
Oh, yes, definitely.
I wasn't sure because Peter kind of slid in and I wasn't quite.
I knew that Astrid was right. We were both on the same wavelength there, Barry.
Peter, you wanted to add something to that?
Actually, I did have another kind of question to Mr. Franklin, and that was I guess maybe this is it's kind of a unique application. But my concern is as we're developing these apartments and giving our approval for it, and I know there'll be others coming up soon, and this one particularly, there is no spot or any area left for green space. And so these people are all going to, a lot of them won't have vehicles, but a lot of them might like to sit out on some green grass or something like that. And it looks like from the building, there isn't any. And I know for subdivisions, we get parkland in lieu of, but is there any, I don't think there's any sort of room for green space with this. They can sit out on their porch. We now are adding potentially 27 units times 2 is 54 more people to that area who might look for green space, as we all do on a hot summer day. So I wonder if there's any, is there any consideration for that at all, Rob, or is every square inch taken up with parking and building?
Mr. Chair, in this instance, from those kind of planning matters, there's a small little playground out at the front of the building that's being proposed to stay as part of the building at 25. It's just a small play structure. There are some small balconies, patios associated with both buildings. There isn't a lot of extra green space. Certainly anything that can be kept as part of some very minor tree protection on the west property line will be looked at for shade, those kinds of things. But being a block and a half from the north end of Victoria, I guess it's closer to 3 blocks, down to Victoria Park North, that would be the closest larger scale green space for these folks to sit at.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Now, we would normally ask for, are there any questions from the public, or are there any questions of the developer? I have some other people on here, but I'm not sure who they are. And but if you have any questions, please speak up.
If I may, my name is Bob Clark. I'm the applicant in this particular case, and I've been listening to some of the discussion. Unfortunately, my Zoom address didn't work, so I do apologize that I'm not on your Zoom connection. I just wanted to clarify, certainly Rob is correct about the parking, and we will be making arrangements for allocation of parking. The parking will be owned by phase 2, which is what we call the new building, and there will be an agreement between phase 2 and phase 1 with respect to providing parking for residents in our existing building. I wanted to clarify, if I may, that it was not the CMHC funding that was the problem. The problem that because we've been working with CMHC for over 2 years now on this particular application, it was when the application for development went to the county and the ministry that they wanted the property separated because we have an agreement with them with respect to our rent geared to income agreement. And they were worried that the rent geared to income agreement would be affected by merging, or by the two properties being on, or the two buildings being on one property. And so that's the reason why we were requested to, in order to qualify for CMHC funding, because the county and the ministry have to agree to this arrangement.
Okay.
Thanks for that clarification, Bob. I thought it was more the CMHC, so it was more these other triggers. I totally apologize, Committee of Adjustment, for my overstatement of fact then.
Well, it's not an overstatement, because it was CMHC, having received that comment, that indicated to us that we were not eligible until we resolved this matter.
Okay. All right. Mr. Clark, since you are representing the development, do you have anything you wish to add?
No, I very much appreciate Rob's presentation and the support that we've gotten from your municipal planning staff.
Thank you.
Chair?
Adrian, have you had any submissions from the public?
No, we received one phone inquiry yesterday from a gentleman who spoke with Glenn McGlashan. Rob, I'm not sure if you want to comment about that. I think he was quite satisfied once Glenn spoke with him.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get back to that that email. I got it 20 minutes ago. His concerns were again more of a land use nature, not specifically associated with this. That with things like, as has been discussed here amongst the committee members, of COVID and density and green space and those kinds of things, to be introducing more in this situation. In this instance, the official plan amendment and zoning are already in place. Kind of hard to go back that step at this point on a project. We're dealing pretty much with just the issues surrounding the so his concerns were higher concentrations of affordable housing in an area, potentially destabilizing the neighborhood and compounding the issues with the town with the issues of transition house around the corner. Again, the concerns that were raised back from Director McGlashan were that COVID-19 issues are a bit more challenging. At this point, there is no planning policies in place around that, and that this density was not, we're not talking downtown Toronto in terms of density. This is still a 3-unit building, similar to what's next door. It's 27 instead of 20 within the current building, which although is high for Coburg, is certainly not high in the larger scheme of things.
All right, are there any more questions from the members?
Chair, if I may, I'd like to direct a question to Mr. Clark. I do have some empathy towards Peter's concern about a lack of green space, and I would just like to hear from Mr. Clark as to what kind of consideration was given on his part to incorporating some green space or creating something that would create that type of an amenity for the residents. I agree with Peter. It's for the type of residents that will live in the building, something like that would be quite nice for them to have. Anyway, if Mr. Clark could answer that, I would appreciate it.
Yes, I appreciate the earlier concerns and comments. What we have, until we were forced to look at severing them, and our intention continues to be, we want to have an interior courtyard, which would be available to the residents and would be set up as an area where residents could enjoy an outdoor area. And the structure itself has balconies and so forth, which provide some access to the exterior. We are limited in space, and we have to deal with the financial realities of making it financially viable. But that is our intention in the original design. We also had the intention of a future link between the two buildings, as indicated in our site plan. That had to be dropped because of financial considerations, but we have maintained the design so that if we can in the future afford a link, that will make our existing building fully accessible, and that's a desire for us as well.
Great, thank you, appreciate that.
Okay. Call for the question. We entertain a a motion, please?
I move the recommendations of the report, the recommendation of the report, that the requested consent to sever the existing 20-unit apartment building on the land known municipally as 25 Jane Street East be granted by the Committee of Adjustment together with an easement for access, parking, services, amenities, and related facilities over the retained lands known as 321 John Street.
And
Do I have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Astrid. All those in favor?
Yay.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Okay, that motion is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm assuming we don't have any other business to deal with today. Our next meeting coming up is the 28th, is it, of July?
Yes, 28th of July at 4.
That is the revised date. Is everybody okay with that?
That's fine. And Adrian, can you just let us know when you do know what the arrangements for signing are going to be? You
Yes.
had mentioned at the beginning the possibility of doing what we did last time. I think Brent has another option in mind. Could you let us know as soon as possible, whichever it's going to be?
Sure, yeah, and Mr. Chair, just to update the other members, it was discussed that we would meet at Victoria Hall Friday at 4:30 to sign the notice of decision. However, Brent has indicated that we may be able to do that electronically. So if that is a possibility, I will keep you guys informed. And if not, I am only available on Fridays to be able to leave to go to City Hall or Town Hall. So if it's not this Friday, it would have to be the next Friday.
Why don't we book the Friday, and if we can do it electronically, then we'll cancel that, but have it as a default.
That would be great. And
If everyone's available, at least for sure we know we can sign it. And
Yes.
is
Great.
everyone okay with that?
Yes, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay, I will send out an email just to
Yeah.
confirm.
I kind of enjoyed that. I thought it was an interesting way to do it.
Well, it gets me out of the house, right?
Yes, it was great.
Okay, that's all our business. Motion to adjourn, please.
I might move the motion.
Alan, seconder for that.
I'll second it, Barry.
Thank you, Barry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Yes, definitely.